Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast series about valuation and business and everything in between. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I'm a valuation expert and divorce financial mediator in St. Louis, Missouri. So today we're actually speaking about a book called Inherited Trauma and Family Wealth with Ruschelle Khanna. And she's a family advisor, a mediator, and a therapist on the East Coast. She really works with parents and families and adult children in order to live a healthy, financially secure life. And a lot of times she's working with individuals who are in the process of business succession, which is transferring those businesses to other generations. So welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me back.
And we've talked a little bit about this topic before, but that was prior to you writing the book. And now you have the book out. And could you tell us just a little bit about the book or about how you decided to write about this topic? Because inherited trauma is really not a topic that everybody talks about or understands. And so maybe you could give us some background for the book and kind of your work in this area.
Yes. So my reason for writing the book and kind of focusing a little bit more on inherited patterns is twofold. One, professionally, I kept seeing these gaps in my work where people were having issues around money or other parts of their life where they didn't understand where the patterns came from. And then as much as we delved into it, it didn't seem to link back to anything that they were specifically doing or anything they specifically went through. So that kind of led me to looking more into their family dynamics and their family history, and learning a little bit more about the things that can be passed on both through our genetics from birth and through parenting styles. And then the second reason is my own personal exploration of inherited trauma, and kind of breaking free of some of my own personal patterns that have been passed down.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, sometimes we can call this therapy. We can call it, shadow work. We can call it kind of trying to understand how we relationship. You might get into some of these patterns, but when we're looking at it, most of the time, I think we're doing kind of traditional, soul searching, or, trying to go back in our past and try to figure out why we're doing things that we're doing. That's a little bit different than really talking about inherited trauma and specifically how it impacts like financial behaviors. So could we start off with you kind of just talking about this inherited trauma? Because again, I think that people understand that, you delve deep into your relationship patterns and styles, and it's, probably based in some of your family environment. But like this term, can we get a little bit clearer on it? And then we can talk about kind of the impact to financial behavior as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So inherited trauma does encapsulate anything that is passed down from generation to generation that is a pain point. In the book, I call them pain echoes. So they can actually be passed in DNA. So you are born with some of the pain of your ancestors literally in your DNA, and that gets expressed and held in your body. The other there's another way we get inherited trauma, and that is through parenting. So how your parents have parented you, the behavioral, the nurture, and the way we were taken care of is also a way that trauma is passed on to another generation. So we have both the genetic, which can impact everything from our health, our metabolic processes, to the decisions that we make, the way we think about things, and then how we are raised. The other part about inherited trauma is that researchers are now learning that we can actually inherit specific memories from our ancestors. And that was what got me started in this work. I inherited an experience that was my mother's. There are signs and ways that you can tell whether or not this was an inherited memory. For example, one way that you can tell is, when did it manifest? If it manifests at the same age that your ancestor went through the trauma, then it is more than likely an inherited trauma. I manifested an issue at 4 years old. My mother's trauma happened to her at 4 years old. And the trauma that I was experiencing was an echo of what my mother had. It wasn't a random different one. It was a grief and loss trauma, because she suffered a grief and loss at age 4. So if you have a point in your history where you think, oh, I got anxiety when I was 7 and I don't know why, that might be inherited trauma.
I think it's almost even impossible for us to totally understand this concept when we're wandering through our lives just thinking that, everything is just a decision that day, right? And so when you're going through and you're dealing with this sort of inherited trauma, how can you even initially tell, like, is this, like, is it just like it's almost from nowhere, or it's kind of unknown? Like, were you confused at whether it was your trauma or not?
Well, at age 4, I didn't know why I was having fears of death. See, age 4 is too young to be thinking about death generally. So I was afraid my dad was going to die. My mom lost her dad at age 4.
Oh,
and I was terrified of my dad dying. And I didn't even tell anybody about this until I was much older, because when you're 4, you're barely, verbal. So one way is that if it manifested at an age that maybe it shouldn't have, or there was no other extenuating circumstances around that, that is one way that we know it's an inherited pattern. And you might want to have a conversation with your family about, hey, did something happen when I was 4 or when you were 4? Or, tell me a little bit about that there. The other is, if you know a family story. For example, I think in the book, there's an example of someone afraid of taxes, filing your taxes. You just have this like aversion. I don't want to get anywhere near taxes. And then as older adults, they found out that their distant relative was arrested for tax fraud a generation ago, and that rippled through the family as a shame, a big stain on the family. So those you may not know, like, why do I have an aversion to doing taxes? It's just, I don't really have anxiety about anything else. Maybe there's a story back there that you're unaware of. The other is this, the story. Great grandma was an alcoholic. She neglected her finances and broke us. We were broke because of her drinking. And I have a drinking problem. And I know that's so direct, indirect, or there's an age of onset where something kind of snapped for you.
Yeah. And and I think that one of the questions then is that, based on that, like, financial issues and finances are usually kind of, could be a stressful situation, right? Or how we deal with them, how we handle them. And so we could just be stressed about finances. How do we actually start to look at the impact of this inherited trauma or generational trauma patterns on our financial well-being? Like, how do you see that those are typically manifesting in the family dynamic that you work with?
Yeah, so in the book, I lay out 5 different kind of overarching categories where it can impact your finances. your feeling of security, so our securities in general. Is it manifesting as the next one is emotional currency, meaning are you having emotional issues relating to money? The next one, it relates to our work life or our family dynamic life. Do I have social resources, and do I feel resourced socially to support myself? The other one is understanding our options. Like, are you struggling making decisions with finances? And then the last one is a culmination of all of those, and that can sometimes manifest as a total life struggle. For example, somebody who has addictions or chronic illnesses or chronic mental illness. Chronic illnesses and inherited trauma are very closely linked, and people who have chronic illnesses have a difficult time with money.
Mm-hmm. But I guess like, why would I want to go down this path? Like, if I have an anxiety towards money, is it just enough to know, that I have this anxiety, or is part of the process kind of finding the root cause, and that's how I can heal from it more? Or, like, because I mean, in some capacity, I'm like thinking of my own self. Okay, well, are these traumas related to some sort of family member, or are they of my own doing? Because I'm always thinking they're of my own doing, right?
Well, one thing that I've seen happen when people start to explore their inherited patterns is a sense of freedom that it didn't start with them. So the most famous book on inherited trauma is a book called It Didn't Start With You. And Mark Wallen wrote that book, and I interviewed him in my book as well. So there's freedom in knowing that you're not the cause or the problem, because at a lot of trauma healing has to do with healing shame and guilt around decision making. And that's at the core of financial issues. When we're holding a lot of shame and guilt, we can't enjoy our money. We are frozen to make decisions that can benefit us. So it really it just stops our progress when we're carrying the shame and guilt of our ancestors.
And so if somebody starts to, like, because I'm now thinking, okay, shame, guilt, do I identify to that? And the book kind of will outline maybe how to walk through figuring your own self out a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, so the first part of the book explains what generational trauma is.
Okay.
The second is kind of a quiz that will kind of direct you to the most relevant chapters for you. So for example, you take the quiz and it seems like you're having trouble feeling secure in your money, with your money. Then you'll go to the securities section, and that is kind of made for you. And then the last part, which I am really excited about, is the stuff that doesn't have to be, that's more present centered, doesn't have to be delving into your past. In fact, for people who are going through a succession, family governance is a powerful therapeutic tool that can heal inherited patterns. You don't ever have to really delve into inherited, what did grandma do and great grandpa do, that deeply. If you just set up good boards, good family governance meetings, put the structures in place for today that will make your family strong going forward. If you're inheriting a trust, what are the things that you need to do today to show up and be responsible with your money? So if you're somebody who's not really interested in doing, years of therapy, focus on the family governance stuff. You can heal your family by just working in the present as well.
So, and you're talking basically with families that are kind of going generation to generation, and you have this generational wealth sometimes that also causes issues. Now, what you talked about with family governance, that really is maybe something that we don't have total control over. Like if we're second, third, fourth generation. So is that going to be different than something that we could do like personally today that would help us start breaking free from this like generational trauma, financial trauma? Because I mean, like, does everybody have some financial trauma? Because if really wealthy people also have it, like everybody just assumes that, well, if you don't have money, the lack of money is going to create that. But the abundance of money can create kind of other types of situations as well.
The trauma does not discriminate because it is the relationship that you have with the money. And I've worked with plenty of high net worth families who were unable to use their resources to help them be happy. And then, of course, overcoming inherited trauma is absolutely relevant for someone who is struggling to make the type of income that they would like to have. Or so it doesn't matter how much money you have. Healing your relationship with money is relevant to all of us because it's our security in the world today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's everybody has to kind of take a look at it. Or, are we first looking at negative patterns and saying, well, maybe, because I think that is liberating to be like, okay, I have some of these negative patterns and maybe it's not from me. And how can I start to kind of do some things different? And how do I do it? Because what you're saying is like people are basically afraid of doing anything. It's almost like they're stuck in these patterns. How can you start to change it? How can you start to, are we discussing it in the family? Like if this is a family business, are we really, it's not always easy to have those discussions with your parents or your other family members about, even the past, like what happened in your life kind of situation. Like, did you I mean, a lot of families could have gone through the depression. They could have gone through these big sort of events, but beyond that, how can we start to do something different, especially if we're in business with family members?
Yeah. So the question here is, how can people create a new financial legacy without guilt or fear of repeating past mistakes? Internally, we can change how we speak to ourselves and start to say, that's not my behavior anymore. So you can start to recognize and call it out internally. So, like, for example, if you have more than enough money to kind of do the things that you want to do, yet there's a voice inside saying, do you have the budget for that? There's not enough for that. You don't have enough for that. You should never feel secure with what you have. You can start to say, that's not me. That's like great grandma, and I'm not listening to that anymore. I'm not. Stop it. So changing our internal dialogue is one thing we can start doing. And then the other thing that I have people start doing is just make a list of all of the things that you know about your family and money. Stories, attitudes toward money, what were like in my family, a running saying was times are hard and money's tight. That was like a phrase that was always kind of joked about and laughed about having money. And then when I grew up, it's like, that's not funny. I don't want to carry that phrase, times are hard and money's tight. Why do I want to think that?
Mm-hmm.
So are there phrases? Are there events in the family? Did someone file bankruptcy? Did someone go through a war and lose all of their wealth? So just list them all out and just take a look at them and see, how might this have impacted me or my mom and dad?
Well, and it's interesting. We were talking in another group yesterday about like the internal voices that you have. And somebody said something really good, which was, when the internal voice is like, you should do this or you don't have this, it's really probably somebody said that to you, as opposed to when I'm saying I am, that's really my own internal thoughts. And so I could see how we would be like, and repeating things that our family has said, like we can't afford that, or that's too expensive, or I think a lot of generations went through not using, like let's keep everything good so that you don't ruin it, and then that's why things have plastic over them. Been preserved for 30 years because we didn't want to use it or make it look used. Like I could see a curbillion different patterns that could be prevalent in a financial picture. What do you think are some of the most prevalent that you see in some of the work that you do?
Yeah, so in the book, there are lists in each chapter of what I call pain echoes. So I'll give you the insecure pain echo. We can't afford that. That was one I learned early on not to ever say. I can afford whatever I want. I just choose to use my resources where I choose to use them. I don't ever say I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Nobody ever helps us. If I just work harder, everything will get better. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter how much income people have. There are wealthy families as well as poor families that are like, I must keep working. I must keep working harder. There's never enough. So the insecure one is a big one. And then I wanted to kind of go over, being indecisive about your money decisions, being frozen to, do I put it in an investment? And, you look up and 10 years go by and it's been sitting in a savings account. You haven't done anything with your money. One of these days I'll get my life together. In the future, just kind of kicking the can down the road. That's a very common one in families of alcoholism. If there's been alcoholism in the family, it's like this timeline gets so blurred and we go years without doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are just a few examples. The book's full of examples of those.
Well, and if I'm in a family business, and I'm a younger generation, how does this work? Like how do we start to work, like how would we even know to work with you, right? Like how would we even know that these are some things that maybe we could work on? Because some of this is like how your dialogue is, reframing things. Is this something that you just start doing things different and maybe the family follows? Because I work with a lot of high net worth individuals, and it seems like almost always they don't ever think they have enough. They think the sky is falling all the time, and and they're sitting on millions, so, and if they're the main founder owner, odds are that sort of mentality, if you've been in the business for a long time, is going to also be kind of pervasive in business decisions and ways that they fund the business and things like that. So what would I, as a younger person in a generation, because I think that that's who's going to maybe recognize this quicker, or are you seeing the parents come in and want to make sure that the kids are dealing with money better? Which way do you normally kind of see it?
Both. I've had adult children bring their parents to advisory meetings or therapy or mediation, and I've also had parents, aunts, and uncles who really care about what is happening with the next generation. And the main thing is that if you're someone who's interested in this, your own healing can ripple through a family and change it. You don't have to drag people on board who are not interested. In fact, I would not bother doing that. I would focus on myself. And then if your family is open, I think the big thing for G4s that I'm seeing, or for next generations that I'm seeing, is don't feel powerless. It is your home, it is your resources, and you can hire people, advisors that you like, to come in and help you have a better relationship with the business. Even if, let's say, your family's on the board now, there are no family members running the business anymore. It's still your business.
Mm-hmm.
So taking back your power and your ownership of what is yours and what was your birthright.
Mm-hmm.
And being comfortable that it was your birthright and that it's okay to take care of those resources, and you don't have to feel guilty for it. You can own it.
Well, I think that, I think that that's helpful. I think that even knowing that there is an option of somebody who is kind of straddling the therapist, the family dynamic, understanding business, understanding finance, it's kind of a mediator role, but realistically, it's just, in my mind, usually the founders or the patriarchy or the matriarchy are not as easy to have conversations with when they're in this trauma kind of response of money. And so I think talking to somebody like you, or having it be kind of a strategic planning kind of situation, is probably a better way to approach it. And then you're working kind of internally on that, because it could be that if those parents, or even aunts and uncles, whoever is at the top generation, sometimes if they can come to it themselves a little bit, it might be easier for them to make changes, as opposed if somebody comes in and says, oh, look, you've created some of this, you've perpetuated some of this. It doesn't quite feel as good. So I think that even knowing, is that how typically families would reach out to you, is kind of on and on, like have this discussion over a series of meetings, if you will?
Yeah, and even a lot of times, if the patriarchy or matriarchy are closed, are lacking in communication skills, a lot of times they're still open to trying to make things better, and they may just be unaware of what they're doing to block progress. So that's where many conversations come into play. Is, it takes a few times. If we're being told, hey, this is problematic, and we've done something a certain way for our entire life, you may want to give, auntie and uncle a little slack, cut them a little slack there, and give them a few times to have conversation about the dynamics in the family. And if it is an inherited pattern, they may feel relief that it didn't start with them.
Right. Absolutely. I think that this has covered a lot. I think that people really need to reach out for your book, because a lot of things that you said today even resonated with me. Some of that, it's almost like I felt like some of these behaviors were just random, behaviors, but you're kind of linking them back up to some things that I could see in some of my past. If somebody really wants to rewrite their financial story and this history, what advice would you give them?
I would say, so start making that list of things that you know about your family. And again, this doesn't have to be like serious therapeutic. Hire a genealogist, make it like a fun project, or hire someone who is going to help you rewrite your family story. If you are a family business, there are plenty of businesses out there that will happily, turn your family story into a beautiful book and marketing tool for your business. And
Mm-hmm.
that process, I have worked with those companies. That process is fun. It ends in something that is valuable for the business, and it's not even therapy. So start writing down your family history or digging around and taking a look at what feels familiar.
I mean, I think that's great advice. And I think that families in business typically will reach out to a lot of advisors and have a lot of different people in play in order to kind of go through this. Now, we have a link to your book, and it's on Amazon, and it is called Inherited Trauma and Family Wealth. And they can also reach out to you on your website. But could you just tell people a little bit about, how you work with these families and that it is a resource? Because again, as much work as I do in the financial realm, all the things that you've talked about, I hear all the time with business owners that are doing well, that are not doing well, that they really do think that is like their own patterns or their own negative behaviors. So how would somebody reach out to you, go to your website and things, but what would be the process, and
Yeah,
maybe where
so
your focus is, right?
yeah, so you just fill out, tell me a little bit about yourself and ask for a consultation on the website. And then there, depending on what you need, maybe it is mediation between you and your adult child. Or maybe it is some family sessions where we start to talk about your family values. Maybe we're rewriting your family narrative together. Maybe there's been a long-standing narrative of like, well, we're the family that does this and for this problematic behavior. Well, maybe we want to kind of rebrand collectively who we actually are. So I love doing values-based work with families. And then we also can do full assessments of your family dynamics and look for other resources that might be really supportive for you. So there are a lot of different ways that we can work together, and mainly it's all about just strengthening the bond between you and your family so that you can honor those resources that you have.
Well, I appreciate you kind of giving us a primer on the book. It is available. I need to read more of it because I obviously probably need to take the quiz. And I think it would just help to identify some things that we're just, we just think it's part of our personality or something, right? Like, I'm just anxious. I just don't like to spend money or something, like whatever's kind of the narrative that's going on in our head. I think that it would be helpful to kind of see if you relate to any of those patterns. And the genealogy is brilliant. Like, absolutely. Everybody's doing, seeing what your family dynamic is. I think that is absolutely fun. It may get even stories that people are telling about, grandma and grandpa and in the, poor or wealthy or, like whatever that narrative is. I think these are great suggestions. So I really appreciate it. If you have anything else to add, we can always have you back to answer questions once people start reading the book. But if you have anything else to add, please let me know. But other than that, I
Yeah.
think, yeah. Any
Uh,
other advice you have for people?
I would just say that, well, one other thing is that the patterns are not always negative either. There's also taking a look at what things we can be excited about and proud of and highlighting those. And this kind of freeing ourselves of the things that we no longer want, and then really honoring our ancestors and ourselves is the goal.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And we hope to see you again soon on the podcast. And for everybody else, go grab the book and see if it could be beneficial for you, your business, or your family. So thank you, Ruschelle. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks.